Movies have painted them as these uncontrollable, bone-stripping killing machines. If a single drop of blood hits the water, it's game over. But if that's true, how come they're legally sold as pets in aquariums all over the world? For decades, piranhas have been one of the most misunderstood animals on the planet. We've all seen the scenes. A character falls into the wrong river, and the water erupts into a frenzy, leaving nothing but a skeleton behind. It's a terrifying image. But this reputation creates a huge contradiction. If they're really that dangerous, why would anyone be allowed to keep them in their living room? To find the truth, I decided to do something most people would call insane. I bought 6 red-bellied piranhas. I built them a custom Amazonian habitat. I observed their behavior. I tested their feeding responses. And then I did the one thing the movies scream you should never ever do. I put my hand in the tank. When the piranhas first arrived, the most surprising thing was how calm it all was. They were shipped overnight, and with the cold weather, I was honestly worried they wouldn't even make it. But all 6 were alive and well. I transferred them into a temporary holding tank, and what I saw was completely unexpected. They weren't aggressive. They weren't frantic. They just sort of hovered. They barely moved at all. I dropped some live insects in the water, expecting that classic movie frenzy, but nothing. No sudden attack, no explosion of violence, just a few slow, cautious movements. After a bit of research, it turns out this is totally normal for stressed piranhas. In a bare open tank, they don't get aggressive. They get scared. So the next step was clear. To see their true nature, I had to build them a proper home. Red-bellied piranhas are native to the Amazon basin, a world of murky water, tangled roots, and dense vegetation. An empty glass box is the opposite of everything they've evolved for. It makes them feel exposed and vulnerable. So I upgraded them to a much larger tank and started creating a slice of the Amazon from scratch. I began with a deep layer of sand to mimic the riverbed. Then I suspended thin branches from the top, letting them hang down into the water like mangrove roots. I bonded larger pieces of driftwood together to create a massive, submerged tree structure rising from the bottom. To break up the open spaces and add more complexity, I scattered rocks and pebbles all around. Then came the live plants, both rooted in the sand and floating on the surface. They provide vital cover, which helps reduce stress, and they also help keep the water clean. In fact, most experts strongly recommend heavily planted tanks to prevent fear-based aggression in piranhas. Once the natural environment was complete, I decided to add a little flair that leaned into their fearsome reputation. I partially buried a small graveyard of tiny skull decorations in the sand. It was purely for aesthetics, a nod to the myth. Of course, the piranhas didn't care at all, but it definitely made the tank look the part. Finally, I installed a powerful filtration and circulation system capable of handling the waste from carnivorous fish. I let the whole system cycle and stabilize before the big move. The moment I introduced the piranhas into their new, completed home, the change was instantaneous. They immediately formed a tight, coordinated school, moving together as a single unit. This is classic piranha behavior. See, contrary to the myth, piranhas school for defense, not for attack. A lone piranha is a nervous piranha. A group feels safe. With the environment settled, it was time to test their feeding response. I started with insects again, mealworms and crickets, and again they were mostly ignored. The fish were curious, but not interested in eating them. This actually lines up with their wild diet. While they're opportunistic omnivores, adult redbellies don't really eat a lot of bugs. Next, I introduced fish-based fooder piece of salmon. The reaction was completely different. The school tightened, their movements became quicker, and they started taking controlled, measured bites. It wasn't chaotic. It wasn't a frenzy. It was orderly. Ground beef got an even stronger response, confirming that scent and protein content are the real triggers, not just random movement. But even then, at no point did it look like the movies. They took turns. They didn't attack each other. It was efficient, not violent, and then it was time for the final test. The moment everyone thinks of when they hear the word piranha, I slowly, deliberately placed my hand into the water. At first, absolutely nothing happened. The piranhas kept their distance, watching from afar. As I moved my hand closer to the school, a few of them broke away and swam toward me. They followed my hand cautiously, getting within a few inches before stopping. They were investigating. There were no bites, no lunges, no attacks. And according to scientists and longtime aquarium keepers, this makes perfect sense. Attacks on humans in the wild are incredibly rare. They're usually linked to extreme circumstances like droughts, when food is scarce and the water is shallow, or when a person accidentally stumbles upon a nest. Healthy, well-fed piranhas simply do not see a large animal like a human as a food source. They are far more likely to flee than to attack. Now, that doesn't mean they're harmless. Those teeth are famously razor-sharp, and a defensive bite is a real possibility if they feel cornered or threatened. But the idea that piranhas are actively hunting people, waiting to tear them to shreds, is a complete myth. It was born from exaggerated stories and Hollywood sensationalism. Their fearsome reputation likely comes from their role as scavengers. They are incredibly efficient at cleaning up carcasses, which is a vital role in their ecosystem. But a scavenger is not the same as a mindless predator. By the end of this journey, one thing was crystal clear. Piranhas are not the monsters we see in the movies. They are complex, intelligent, and highly reactive animals whose behavior is shaped entirely by their environment. In the wrong conditions, they're skittish and stressed. Movies didn't make piranhas famous because they were telling the truth. They made them famous because fear sells. Thanks for watching. If you found this interesting, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the animal kingdom. See you next time.